In the mid to late 2000s, the kaiju genre wasn't really setting its best foot forward. After Godzilla Final Wars, Toho put the Big G on a temporary hiatus. Many Japanese giants would arise in Godzilla's absence, not really to commemorate the genre, but instead mock it. Many parody-type movies like Monster X Strikes Back and Death Kappa would release with mixed to negative reception by critics. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of love for guys in suits smashing miniatures around this era, with only some tokusatsu shows really taking it serious to some degree. But one monster film that does tend to stand out from all the spoofs around this time is a little movie about a big man. The movie Dai Nipponjin, translated as Great Japanese, was released to Japanese cinemas in 2007. A superhero-type kaiju movie that is not like your typical story you associate those genres with. The film is about a man named Masaru Daisato, who can transform into a giant, and he uses his ability to stop oversized monsters from wreaking havoc across Japan. Unlike other superheroes who keep their identities a secret, Daisato is well known to the public as the Giant, known as Big Man Japan, and has nothing to conceal. But rather than being adored by admirers who are grateful for him keeping the peace, people tend to despise him. And as if that weren't bad enough for the guy, we also learn that he has no real friends, looks down on himself, has an agent that mooches off him, and is going through relationship problems with his wife and child. The only person who seems to care for him is his grandpa, whom we find out has a case of dementia. Possibly. So seemingly nothing tends to go right for this guy. But you might be thinking, what does all the personal drama of this introverted man have to do with the superhero and monster stuff? Well, Dai Nipponjin is not your traditional superhero story. Daisato is not like Peter Parker, trying to manage two lives while concomitantly trying to maintain both. As I said, everyone knows he is Big Man Japan. In fact, it's his day job. But the film doesn't have him try to cure himself from his abilities, try to gain the love of his life back, nor does he garner compassion from the people of Japan. Daisato is a stoic protagonist, getting through life day in and day out. He treats his job protecting Japan as if it's another day at the office. And as the movie fills you in on details about it, you'll come to realize just how miserable the whole thing is on him. We learn that the government does pay him for his services, but we also observe that he earns additional income by exploiting his fights for television. Hilariously, however, we also see he makes money by plastering the logos of his sponsors all over his body, from his chest to his back. The one place he refuses to get them, though, are his hips. For some reason, he flat out rejects having them there. Why, pray tell? Who knows? That's never explained. In fact, this whole movie has a lot of up-in-the-air questions that never get answered. Personally though, that's something I like about this movie. It gives you its premise and just proceeds to get to the end, never stopping to give exposition to things like where do the monsters come from, or why Daisato can transform. Yeah, the film gives details on certain things, but is done so in a way that doesn't feel like a teacher is hammering it into my head for an upcoming test. Every bit of information you get feels natural to the story's progression. We find a lot of stuff out by way of a camera crew documenting Daisato's life. In fact, most of the movie is shown from their point of view. Fret not if you're wondering if the kaiju action is shown by way of shaky cam. It is not. A majority of the film is the camera crew chronicling Daisato's life. Given the man's neutral protagonist role, you might think that sounds kinda boring, but what salvages it is the very down-to-earth performances done by the actors. Anytime someone gets asked a question, it always feels like it's on the spot, like the people being asked don't know how to respond to it right away, or they just casually know the question well enough to give a straight answer. What I'm getting down to is that the characters feel like people. None of them try to ham it up in front of the camera or come off as overused stereotypes. Everyone has a natural vibe to them here. It feels like I'm listening to real people, and that's what aids this movie's rather slow pacing, of a simple man enjoying traditional Japanese culture, which Daisato is very into, and is also anti-US. Why so? Well, that's just how he was brought up. Daisato loves Japanese traditions so much that he goes through a ritual before transforming. It's unnecessary, and even the military guys say the whole thing is uncalled for, but that's the way it's done. The Big Man Japan way. Oh, it stinks! Daisato's transformation stems from his family's heritage, which his past relatives were also able to transform into giants that ventured off to go save Japan from threats. The difference between them and Daisato is that they were actually looked onto as heroes, even having products made in their image. Daisato is looked on as anything but a hero, with the public bad-mouthing him on television, throwing rocks at his window, or even having graffitied every power plant in Japan, shaming him. Why power plants though? Well, the way Daisato and his family transform is by having electrodes inserted on their nipples while they are electrically shocked in a giant pair of undergarments. Doing so makes them transform. I don't fully get how that works, and I don't know how his relatives from the past were able to do so given the lack of resources that Daisato uses, but that's how it's done. It's also a reason why Daisato is now divorced. You see, only Daisato's blood relatives can transform this way, and his wife is against her little girl going through all that just to transform. A motivation Daisato does have is to try and reconnect with his family, who he can only see once every now and again, something he is genuinely pleased to do. But sadly in the end he fails because of his occupation of carrying on Big Man Japan. And like many questions that don't get answered, it's never explained on why it's only his bloodline who could and still can do this. The question does come up if someone else were to try and electrocute themselves, would they be able to transform? While we never see that happen in the movie itself, there is a deleted scene of a woman that shows what happens if a regular person tries to electrocute their nipples to transform. YouTube is probably not going to let me show this, but let's just say that it turns your chesticles into looking like volcano tops. So yeah, not just any person in this world can turn into a giant. However, it did accidentally turn a cat into a monster, so I don't know. The movie just kind of bends its own rules every now and again. Okay, so about the kaiju stuff. That's probably what you're most interested in, right? Well, I've watched a lot of Japanese giant monster material in my time, and I have to say that this movie definitely has some of the most strangest looking kaiju I've ever seen. You have the leaping monster, which is just a guy's head on a leg hopping around saying, "See!" Then you have the one-eyed monster. Aha, get it? Dick joke? Well, actually this thing is called the Evil Stare Monster, which uses its eye as a mace to attack its foes. You got the stink monsters, which are sassy and very aroused creatures. A child monster who just wants to impress, a strangling monster who just wants to suplex, and a red demon called Midon, who I'll go over more in a bit. There are about half a dozen different looking monsters in this movie, and if you took notice, a lot of them have humanoid-like appearances. Definitely different from the traditional dinosaur or insect-looking creatures that the genre overuses. Apparently they were all modeled after Japanese comedians and actors, which might be where some of their gimmicks come from, like the strangling monster's hair always being flung into place, or the leaping monster's quirk of always saying "see." This is something that obviously is going to go over most people's heads, but even if you don't get the reference, the visual gags the monsters perform are still downright hilarious to view. You'll also notice that all the kaiju are CGI creatures. Dai Nipponjin is one of the first Japanese movies to fully use CGI like this with its characters. And while, yeah, it will look dated by today's standards, it kinda adds a little charm to the movie. I'll always love the art of suitmation, but I can fully admit that the limitations of that aren't a problem with CG. And a lot of what the monsters do in this would have just been a nightmare to pull off using practical effects. If you like monster versus monster action, then I can positively say that you're gonna get a lot of that here. And the fights are spread out evenly throughout the film's near 2-hour runtime, and most of the battles are short and to the point. Monster shows up, we see it causing trouble, and Big Man Japan steps in to take care of the situation, by way of fighting, or maybe even trying to reason with the enemy to just go away. I'm not even joking on that. We also never know if the giants are stepping on property or trying to avoid squishing human lives. Once the action starts, we never see any bystanders' reactions or hearing screams of the frightened civilians. The city just kinda becomes a barren battleground, with a few exceptions here and there. Daisato may struggle a bit with his opponent, but with a little dumb luck, he manages to claim the win in most of his battles. And every time he defeats an enemy, their souls ascend into heaven. Because why not? The only foe he struggles against is with a red monster known as Midon. It's never called that in the film, but that's the name the writers gave it. Midon is a ruthless creature that Daisato is actually afraid of after his loss against it. So much so that Daisato tries to flee every time he encounters Midon, and the red creature really lets him have it, with not even Daisato's grandpa being able to help. However, out of nowhere comes the Justice Family, a group of American superheroes coming to aid Daisato. And just by appearances alone, they are an obvious parody of Ultraman and a bit of Super Sentai. In fact, we even see Science Patrol knockoffs known as the Super Defense Team, complete with their own patrol car and jet. And if you also took notice, the monsters drastically changed over from CGI to suitmation. Badly done suitmation at that. I get it was intentional, but geez, these suits look like they were made to compete against the ones from Go Godman, if anyone's familiar with that. Like I said, the Justice Family are stated to be the American heroes. They're American because they scream really loud, are very forceful, yell out English catchphrases, and are more aggressive in their battle. Baby Yoda! I don't fully get the 70s style they have going for their designs, but it's at least memorable. Anyway, the Justice Family arrives on the scene to fight Midon, and what better way to start than by grabbing a bus and shoving it in your opponent's face, while your sister rolls up giant newspapers to club him with. All while mommy and daddy are watching proudly from the side, knowing Junior can violently beat up someone. It's a very funny fight scene for about a minute. I have to admit that this is the one fight in the movie that overstays its welcome. And calling it a fight is a bit of a stretch. Once Midon transitions from CG to suit, he just completely loses all his enthusiasm and just stands around and lets the Justice Family have their way with him. But even though he lost his passion to do anything, he at least gained a set of clothes and grew his hair out longer, only added so the Justice Family can violently rip it off him, which lingers on and on. I mean, is this really supposed to be funny? After the battle segment, the Justice Family forcefully pick Sato up, become an amusing prop, yes I get the joke, and fly away to space, I guess. Yeah, there's no resolution to Sato's tale, it just kind of ends. Though you could interpret it as Daisato coming to terms to trust Americans, and also gaining a new family after failing to connect with his own, even if he was kinda shoehorned into it. Overall, Dai Nipponjin is a wonderful treat for those who don't even have to be interested in kaiju movies to enjoy this one. The plot's not incredibly interesting, especially to how our lead just doesn't care to do much, but the performances, the mockumentary style of the film, and the quirky humor really come together nicely. I forgot to mention that Daisato is played by the director and co-writer of the film, Hitoshi Matsumoto, a man best known for televised comedy in Japan, which I guess is why many of the monsters are based around Japanese comedians. This movie was Matsumoto's directorial debut, and he would only do a handful more before dropping out of the film industry altogether. Dai Nipponjin wasn't a bad attempt, and I would have loved to have seen some type of follow-up to it. But sadly, the film just barely made its budget back when it was released, so any chance of a sequel was dead on arrival. However, the movie did surprisingly well when it was brought overseas. It had a few successful screenings at film festivals, and even got a small theatrical run in America, with the title Big Man Japan, where it was praised by critics. In fact, Hollywood was so impressed by the picture that a full-on American remake of the film was planned for production, with Neil H. Mortez as producer and Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi tasked to write it. Unfortunately, the last news that came out about it was way back in 2011, so I guess it's safe to say that the film was quietly cancelled. Dai Nipponjin, or Big Man Japan, definitely has a lot of charm to it. The mockumentary stuff was intriguing, the monster fights are silly but amusing for the most part, and overall the story kept me engaged. If you're looking for a movie that doesn't take itself seriously, then Big Man Japan is a must-see popcorn film for a movie night. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Canon.